Well, if I can call the meeting to order, welcome you all here. We've got a quorum. We have an apology from Councillor Robinson, do we, or is she online? Do we have any further apologies? Oh, Councillor Dietschy. Thank you, Greg. All good. That Paul's apology be accepted. Please say aye. Thank you. Conflicts of interest. I'm assuming there are no conflicts of interest. We have no public forums, deputations and petitions, no extraordinary and urgent business, and no notices of motion at this stage. The minutes have been circulated. Can I have a mover that they be accepted? Thank you, Peter Scott, moved, and Craig Pauling, that they are a true record of last meeting. Is there any discussion of that? In this case, I shall put the motion that we accept the minutes as a true and accurate record of last meeting. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. That puts us on to report items 8.1. Thank you, Craig. I was still on page 12. Who do we call for? David, if you would like to present this report 8.1.
Kia ora koutou katoa. The report is presented on resolutions update. As you can see, all resolutions are complete, but happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Cool. Thank you, Craig. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Dion. Is there any discussion of the motion? This is on page 15. The recommendation notes the status of previous resolutions providing the status of Catchment report to August 2023. No discussion. Can I put the motion? All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. 8.2. David, or is it just Jesse? This is the Catchment Resilience Committee quarterly work programme.
Kia ora koutou. Through you, Mr. Chair, the purpose of this paper is to update the committee in terms of its quarterly work programme update. Just note the recommendations tabled in the report. The report provides the key updates to the work programme related to the period up to the end of Q4, i.e. to the end of June 2023. Please note that the overview report for the committee, which is later on this agenda, which Lee Griffiths will present, contains a bit more detailed information in relation to the various projects within the work programme. Just note in terms of attachment 8.2.1, the levels of service which aren't met highlighted with the red cross, particularly level of service 26 around maintaining flood protection and drainage infrastructure to agreed standards while considering broader outcomes, and targets 26.2 and 26.3 and the annotated reasons as to why those haven't been met. Also note that just on page 24 of your agenda, the Q4 status for the 2021 flood recovery program has been adjusted to at risk or monitor, and this is just due to the program being behind schedule due to the staff deployments associated with the Hawke's Bay Cyclone Gabrielle work, with some work being deferred for that reason. So yeah, happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair. Relatively straightforward program update, and more will be covered in the latter report.
Thanks, Jesse. Just page 23, target 26.3, related to the review of the gravel management strategy. I'm just wondering if you're able to sort of update us briefly on where that's at. I'm particularly interested in the LiDAR data and how that is tracking in terms of providing good information about the pros and cons of gravel.
Through Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could actually respectfully defer that question until we get to the overview report, Lee will be able to take you through the broader work program, including the gravel management strategy, and provide you a bit more insight into where that work's at. So, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
That's fine by me. I was going to ask if that's what you'd like to do. So thank you for that, Jesse. Any further questions? Cool. In which case, there is a recommendation that we receive the work program report for quarter 4, 2022-23 for the Braided River Revival Whakamutunga Pakihi program and the biodiversity and biosecurity portfolio and leading flood and river resilience program, the climate change and community resilient portfolio. Do I have a mover for that? Thank you, David East. Seconded, Greg Burton. Any further discussion?
I have one thing that I was going to raise, but whether I do it here or on 8.4, but I noticed that Willows area that was discussed in the paper on page 22. That could be a reason to go on a field trip. I thought that sounded quite a cool area that I'd like to see, or at least know where it is specifically, because yeah, it sounds really cool. So just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, for sure. A map would be fantastic. But that sounds cool. So well done.
Thank you, Greg. Jesse, I take it you've noted Greg's comments. Thanks for that. On our way to Twizel. Yeah. I'll put the recommendation. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Now we have 8.3, which I think is you, Jesse, again. Page 25. And just to make it clear to the committee that this has come to the committee rather than the council because of timing issues. We can make minor adjustments to the report, but I think, as I understand it, there is a reasonable satisfaction with the thrust of the report. So, Jesse, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just firstly, I'd like to introduce Victoria Clare, Strategy Advisor in my team, who you will be familiar with from previous submissions. Victoria's done some great work for us on a range of submissions that have fed into this submission actually as well. So Victoria's available for some of the more technical questions and comments as well. So thank you, Mr. Chair. This submission relates to work that's being undertaken by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet as part of the response to the New Zealand Infrastructure Strategy. Environment Canterbury provided a submission on that strategy back in 2021. The focus of this consultation is on problem definition and gathering understanding of the barriers, issues and options for reform of the critical infrastructure system. This is only the first phase of consultation on the topic. We expect further consultations on policy options next year with the potential for a bill to be introduced in 2025. I generally agree with the problems as set out in the discussion document and have provided context for DPMC to view our view as a regional council. This work is also heavily linked to the newly introduced emergency management bill, which is open for consultation through till the 3rd of November. That bill is currently at the select committee stage and open for submissions. We'll be making a submission and briefing council on that, I think, around October this year, all going to plan. Key points for the submission to note in terms of the recognition of our flood resilience infrastructure as critical infrastructure. We know that our flood resilience infrastructure is critical infrastructure and our network provides benefit to all other infrastructure beyond the rating districts. To ensure the resilience of the network, we need recognition of this protection, sustained and continued co-investment from central government. The consultation document has not chosen to provide a definition for critical infrastructure, instead deferring that to the process proposed in the newly introduced emergency management bill. The process set out in the emergency management bill replaces the existing lifelines with critical infrastructure entities, which are gazetted by the minister if they meet the criteria as set out in section 51 of the bill. This will be a key focus in our submission on the emergency management bill as well. Other key points to note include that while we agree with the problems posed by the 4 megatrends, These are not the only threats to our critical infrastructure system. Existing threats such as earthquakes and in the North Island volcanoes will continue to pose challenges to the resilience of the system and must be accounted for in future reforms. Reforms must not fall into the trap that there is a one-size-fits-all solution to these challenges. For each piece of infrastructure, there is a wide context that will affect the resilience of that piece, which must be recognised by any new regulatory approach. This includes local knowledge, Runanga aspirations, local geography, and historic funding and investment patterns. Investment on resilience before disrupting events saves money in the long term by ensuring the continued function of critical infrastructure and reducing post-event recovery costs. However, local government and communities cannot be expected to bear this cost alone, either for the funding of improved resilience of public infrastructure, for example, our stop banks, or as passed on costs by the private sector. So telecommunications companies increase prices, for example. We do not support the government to have greater powers to intervene in the management of critical infrastructure, but expect under extreme situations relating to national state emergency they would. While we support having a single key agency for the entire critical infrastructure system, we advise this is not NEMA, which is referenced in the submission. From our experience as a regulator, we know that the cooling effect this can have on open collaborative conversations, and are concerned of the effect this could have in the effective management of emergency events. So the submission is attached to your paper there. I'll take the paper as read. Happy to take any questions and note the recommendations around supporting the submission, and then delegating any minor amendments to the Chief Executive as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. So questions. I note we've got a question from Vicky, then Peter. Vicky, the floor is yours.
Yes, so I've actually got 3 questions, I think it is. But so the first one, under question 3, paragraphs 23 and 24, talk about considering a full range of dynamic adaptive pathways for critical infrastructure and thinking outside of the box and so on. And I just wondered whether we could give an example, or perhaps you could give me an example, because I'm actually not sure that I really understand what that's saying we're recommending.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, we were having a bit of a think about this since this morning as well. One example potentially would be around our transport networks, where the resilience of our transport network has been under threat with various natural disasters of late, and having that resilience within the transport network and supporting that through funding. So things like our bridges crossing that built-in resilience to those adverse events, because of that critical supply chain network of that transport network provides across the South Island. So that's where we build that resilience and have adaptive pathways in terms of alternative routes to support our ongoing transport freight system and passenger movement across the South Island. So that's an example where we could actually add something in that respect to that wording, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Or even thinking about the networks themselves and how, if there's more flexibility, it's not just a single chain, because that's often the problem, isn't it? When you get one piece broken, which even if it's a single bridge, and so that's actually probably some more outside of the box. Go wider. Okay, thank you. And the next question was around in paragraph 27, we refer to the benefits of increased upfront expenditure on critical infrastructure. And I know that it's been referenced before, the dollars spent in upfront and how much it saves in terms of avoidance of recovery costs after. And I know there is a particular example, I think from the West Coast maybe, that gets used. So I don't know where, that might be the one to use, and that could be used in there, but maybe we've got some figures for our own work, which would be nice to do.
That's through Mr. Chair. So I had Lee provided me some figures, just 2018 figure. So for every dollar invested in our flood protection, there's a $55 of avoided losses on average. So that's a figure we could use in the submission if you're happy with that amendment. The relevant example here in Canada.
That's a Canterbury specific example. The national figure. Okay, but I it's still telling national back to their national, but that's all good. Reinforces it. Thank you. And then just in terms of under paragraph 55, we state that we strongly recommend that the responsibility for resilience of New Zealand's critical infrastructure system isn't given to NEMA. And I just wonder if we should maybe just explain why we're saying that. And I'm sure there's a very good reason.
Yes, so the reason why we don't think it's NEMA is because we know from our experience as a regulator that we can have a cooling effect on those open conversations. And when you get in a room with people, if you're with the person who's policing you, suddenly you start getting very, very quiet. We would be very worried about that in the event of emergencies. But I think we can probably, if this would make it clearer, is maybe we can make that clearer in paragraph 55 and 56, maybe combining them.
Thank you, Vicky. Peter.
Just a little statement, then a question. In my discussions that we've had with DPMC and others, we're not categorised as critical. We're not categorised as anything, actually. We're not referred to, rivers aren't referred to anywhere. The critical infrastructure that's been described by DPMC is seen as what people need, right? And it comes out of Gabrielle and other whole lot of areas. Oh, we need to be able to talk to each other. We need to have sewage. We need to have fresh water and all the rest of it. But you know, our definition of that is how do we protect that? So I think that's a discussion that we need to push forward, and we're trying to develop that. Darren Alter and myself are trying to develop that with McAnulty and others. But I'm just wondering whether we shouldn't have more of a definition about, because I see this quite clearly, that this is primary infrastructure and the other stuff is secondary infrastructure. In fact, some of it's tertiary infrastructure. So I'm just wondering whether, I mean, it's a good submission, it really is, but I'm just wondering whether there is, and this is the question, whether there's an opportunity to change the narrative a little. And I'm not even going to say where you'd put those words in, but I'm just thinking that, and maybe not now, but we should consider that. We should consider how we talk about it.
So my question to that, Jesse, while you're thinking about the answer, is haven't we already done that in the submission to a degree?
Can
I just make a comment, because we talk about our major assets is, our primary assets are these things, and they are there to protect people and protect land, protect assets. You know, that's why they're there. That's why we put them there. And when you talk about your major asset, you probably turn a few people off. Who's concerned about your assets? But if you're concerned about what they do, then that's how I see it. Anyway, you may have a different view, Mac, but that's how I see it.
No, thanks, Peter. That's cool.
Through Mr. Chair, we could, in paragraph 7, if the committee's happy with that, paragraph 7 of the submission, we could expand, get some words from you, Peter, in terms of that flood protection infrastructure is critical infrastructure sentence there, and just make that really pertinent.
When we talk about that, sorry, but when we talk about that, we need to have a same narrative. We need to talk, when we talk to people about that, we need to say, look, the primary asset that we have is flood protection. Full stop. We don't need to say any more than that. And then, you know, if I'm talking to a minister, that's what I would say to him, because then what's he going to ask me back? And what does that mean? But when we have a big, long narrative about what that is, I think that changes things a bit.
Just before you, if you could hold your thought, John would like to have an intervention here as well, same subject.
Well, I think you're correct, Peter. And in the conversation we had with DPMC, we've really pushed the idea that our flood protection is the architecture within which all those other newly defined critical infrastructures hang. And without that being put in place, they can plan, they can report, they can do anything they like. But literally, if the bridge is out, it doesn't happen. And the response we got back from DPMC was, that is not in our remit. This is our remit. If you want to talk about rivers, talk about resilience, go and talk to NEMA, go and talk to MB, go and talk to someone else. So in a sense, we have asked our own question in the submission and written it in the sense of, this is what critical infrastructure means to me. I am more than happy for us to hang it in there and say, that is the architecture all this falls off.
but it was made very clear to us that that wasn't the remit and they weren't interested in that conversation. But to continue to reiterate it, I think, is important. And I note there's the two discussion documents out, and Minister McNulty talked about Gabrielle in one sense, and then jumped straight to needs of people and newly defined critical infrastructure. So the piece in the middle, for me, that was missing, our rivers, our protection, our bridges, for all those things in the middle that would provide protection, is missing out of the conversation. It jumps straight to the need of the people. And so, again, trying to push that part of the conversation, but it doesn't sit within the remit of this conversation. So, yes, I think we should still push it in here, push it really strongly in the emergency management submission and any other opportunity which reinforces your conversations, Peter, in Wellington. But we're in a siloed space, and it really pisses me off that we're looking for overarching, and we still have these government silos going, we're talking about this, not interested in that. This is policy. Funding happens over there. That happens over there. Don't talk to us. So, yeah, the more we can push, the better.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I sat next to you at the DPMC briefing on it, and certainly that was the messages forward to them at that. But they did say, yeah, there's other ways of with other spaces that will be approaching this. So we can beef that section up. That's section paragraph 7. I think would probably be the right space to reflect that conversation. If everybody's happy with that, be another sentence or two in that space. And then certainly through the emergency management bill submission, which we'll brief you on and get your feedback into on that submission as well. We can really hammer home that point.
Thanks, Jesse. And I take it that there is no pushback on the comments that Peter and John have made. Everyone agrees with that. So, Jesse, you've got clear direction on that. Thank you for that. In which case, we have two recommendations. One that we approve the submission, and the other is we delegate to the Chief Executive the authority to make minor amendments. Do I have a mover and a seconder for those two motions? Thank you, Vicky, and then Grant.
Chair, do they fall the direction of that discussion we've just had? Does that fall within the minor, or do we need actually another amendment? Minor.
Wait, Jesse, you're not.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, no, I would consider that it's reflective of the conversation, and it's a point we can make. It is in the submission. It's just making it more emphasis in that one paragraph. So.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Thanks, Jesse. Any further comments? Grant.
Just by way of discussion, the submission I think is really, really good. It does convey the message that there's a significant element missing from the government's thinking in terms of trying to provide or the need to provide for a holistic, integrated approach to everything. And in the presentation to the South Island transport chairs, they were indicating that they weren't going to go down a silo approach. My suggestion to them was that because they weren't thinking about river protection, that in fact they were going down a silo approach and not thinking holistically. In terms of where you could beef up and be stronger in our critical infrastructure, I was looking at item 12 actually, where we're saying we expect flood protection to be suitably recognised. I think we could be really directive and say it must be included and be strong on that, because we know that flooding in our rivers impacts on all of those things that they've got on their list, probably except the cyber security one, but all of those other things, those major services that they're worried about, will all be impacted. And that's on top of those other issues that you've raised too about the geological type things with the AFH and those sort of things that might happen in the future as well. So those other natural disasters. But on the whole, I think the submission's really good, and it would be good to just see it beefed up a little bit and make a stronger voice, which will assist the chair in discussions in Wellington.
Thank you, Grant. Any other further comments? In which case, I'll just reinforce the discussion really, and I think one of the lessons that we learned from the 21 floods was the importance of roading and bridging infrastructure, which is dependent on our flood protection infrastructure in keeping our communities connected to the very services that this submission, this policy document is around, which is health and food and various other things. And the Mayor of Ashburton reflected on the fact that Tynwald was, for 4 days, was cut off from any medical services. And Councillor Sunkel, as a Red Cross driver, commented on the same issue around the Selwyn district, when a lot of the roads and bridges were washed out as a result of those 21 floods. People, expectant mothers, couldn't get centralised services because of what we see as the critical infrastructure, which is the roads and bridges. So thank you, Jesse, for bringing forward, and Victoria for bringing forward a very good submission. You want to make a comment?
Clarify, we're happy with that subsequent change from Councillor Ridge as well, just on paragraph 12 to make it must be recognised rather than suitably. Yep, happy with that. Yep.
So we're all good. We're all happy. I'll put the motion, the two motions. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Right, now we're going, before we go on to 8.4, we're going to do, so just before we call Lee forward.
What are you doing?
I'm doing the equivalent of my chairman's report, but really this isn't a report of what we've been doing, but it's a report of what we'd like to do. And so Councillor Pauling and I, Councillor Pauling as the vice chair, we've already instigated our three-pronged strategy for catchment resilience. One is the funding issue, and we've talked about co-governance from central government. That's and Chair Scott is pushing that as hard as he can with other regional leaders. And the other part of that funding arrangement really is sorting out our own funding mechanisms from, and whether that's regional, district, or local funding. Local funding as in targeted rating for river schemes, and revisiting just how appropriate those systems are. And this will come forward as part of our LTP discussions for the resources required for catchment resilience. Second part of the strategy is making sure that we have the right structures in place, and whether we move from how and if and whether we move from the old catchment board model, which is what we've inherited, how we protect our infrastructure, and we've just been discussing the importance of that, how we enable our river engineers to have jurisdiction across the whole of the region rather than just the and this is to enable work to be done rather than just the targeted rating schemes. How we fund and do the work for out of scheme work, and how we might look at moving to a whole of catchment management process, and which catchments we might look to do all of these things too. Because we have the largest region in New Zealand, and so it won't be a one answer fits the whole of the region. We'll have bespoke solutions for whether the district council areas or different river catchments. And then, of course, the third part of that strategy is enabling the work to be done. And clearly one of the priorities there is shingle removal. And Lee will talk about that in her report. And I note that we've also, that the council is looking to consent its ability to do weed control with agricultural chemicals. And I think the third part of enabling work to be done, and a third part is enabling locals to do work and intervening in issues which they can see. And I can speak, for example, in the floods last weekend, I was driving past a bridge and I noticed a tree that had washed up and was about blocking this particular bridge. Water was starting to go around the outside of the bridge. I had a chainsaw in my truck, so I just hacked away at the tree. And it disappeared under the bridge and out to sea. Over the weekend, I also went up to top of one of the rivers to a party, and on the way in across a bridge, the owner of that property had a 25-ton digger, and he had intervened on 2 bridges for exactly the same reasons, and without any permissions or anything. But in fact, it probably saved both those bridges. And what I'm saying really is that you know, people might be horrified that this is going on, but actually this is doing God's work. And the fact that there's a black area or a grey area there where this work isn't enabled is something that I think this council needs to think about as to how we can enact that. And I also noted from our own, and this goes back to the cost and compliance, but from our the drainage district in which where we live, I think the drainage district now has 40% of its budget goes on cost of compliance and consenting, whereas 25 years ago, I think only 5% of its budget was going on that overhead cost. And so we need to think about whether, in fact, some of the rules and regulations we have in place are genuinely having the right environmental outcomes, or whether they are just, in fact, an impost on the ratepayers and making it more difficult for our staff to get on and do the work that's required. And I'm not saying I know the answer to that, but I am posing a question that's something that where we have that jurisdiction to ask those questions and see if we can simplify the answers, then that might be something we should look at doing. And in terms of Lee's about to present her the work program overview. Craig and I want to, we want to start to frame the conversation from this committee as the resourcing requirements for this committee's work program for the LTP. So what are the additional resources that might be required? What do we need to do? What do the out of the river stuff look like? What does that mean in terms of staff? Have we got the right numbers of engineers? So when we listen to Lee's report and then ask questions, perhaps we can just frame our mindset around that as the sort of the overarching discussion we want to get out of this meeting today. So Lee, if I could call you forward, please.
Before we start, will we have the opportunity, even though we're going to discuss a few things now, will we have an opportunity to go through that process you talk about, perhaps at a briefing or at another time?
So part of the intent, yes, absolutely. So actually, Lee would probably better talk to me about this, but there are various briefings that the staff are going to bring forward to the council about various parts of our program. So yes, it's an iterative process which we will work our way down through and try to make sure we have the right information, the right discussions as we get closer to the crunch points of when we have to make decisions. So the answer to that is yes, and Lee might talk about that at the end of her report. The other thing is at the end of this discussion, at the end of Lee's report, the intent is to blow all the protocols for a short time and open up the discussion to a sort of a wider ranging discussion, as long as we don't go too long, because Nook's got an appointment, and as long as we don't wander off topic, but we'll monitor that. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'll take most of the report as read, but there is quite a lot of detail in it, so I will cover the key topic areas, particularly the ones you've indicated you wish to hear more information about. So the report centres on a wide range of activities covered under the Leading Flood Resilience and Braided River Revival Whakamutunga Awa Pākahi programme. So I'm going to start at key point number 7, because I will acknowledge we normally do quite a chunky gravel section in the paper, and we haven't done that this time, so I'll cover that off verbally. So gravel continues to be a really hot topic right across Waitaha, and there's 2 parts of gravel. There's sort of the technical part and the gravel management part. So I'll cover the technical part first. So post-flood, we commissioned a wide range of data collection. So we have received and processed LiDAR for a number of rivers, particularly the Ashley Rakahuri, Selwyn Waikirikiri, Ashburton, Hakatiri, and Orari, and others. And we have received but not yet processed the data for others. So I know that we have the rangatata information, but we have not had a chance to process that yet. So that's really important information in terms of giving out availability advice. So staff have been very busy across the region advising where gravel should be taken for flood risk purposes. There's then two processes in which people can apply for gravel. One is a gravel authorisation, which is Environment Canterbury. We set ourselves up to have a permitted activity rule, and we pass on that right to others to take gravel on our behalf for flood risk purposes. And the other part, a pathway, is a resource consent pathway. Just acknowledge upfront that both pathways have had significant processing delays. For the authorisation one, it is quicker generally, it is cheaper. It's supposed to be, it's a tool where people are doing a good service for us in the community. We have had to move our processing officer to consents to help with the consent backlog because that has a statutory legal risk and the authorisation doesn't, so that has held up the process, but we have diverted other staff to try and catch up. That is obviously having an impact on staff being diverted off other activities. We have done a paper to the Mayoral Forum, and also there's been a range of hui in the gravel space. For the gravel management strategy specifically, that's a non-statutory document that was put in place in 2012 under the Local Government Act. It's over 10 years old, so it is right to look at the approach and refresh it. What we've discovered as we've been engaging with Papatapu Runanga partners and others is actually having that conversation fits very strongly into the RPS review as well. There is a conversation happening at the moment of, do we actually need a separate strategy, or is that part of the RPS? Regardless, the work's still happening. It is behind, but it is still happening, but it may be wrapped up into that process. We've had one hui with our regional Runanga partners. Second one was delayed due to flooding. It's been rescheduled for the end of August, and we continue to talk to a wide range of stakeholder groups in that space as well. So there is a large amount of work happening in gravel. I'll move on to Braided River Revival, Whakamutunga Awa Pākahi now. There's some significant programs of work happening under this. It all encompasses under the 100-year regional river strategy. So everything fits nicely under that, including the leadership on Environment Canterbury land, particularly through our parks and forest initiatives. And we have started specific Braided River biodiversity strategies, both for the Ashley Rakahuri and the Rakatata rivers, as well as delivering a number of on-ground biodiversity projects. Flood recovery at paragraph 27, we hope to have, or we currently planned floods and weather pending, to finish the bulk of that work by Christmas, and the tail end of that this financial year. Substantive amount of work in that program. We were delayed a bit last financial year with 7 floods in 6 weeks. We have had some further flood damage last week from last week's orange rain event, where we lost approximately 110 metres of stop bank from the Waihi and Selwyn Waikirikiri rivers, which we're now programming in repairs, and there has been minor other isolated damage, particularly in the upper Hines and Ashburton Hakatiri rivers, which staff are addressing, but that program of work is largely on track. The Shovel Ready program, or known as Climate Resilience program, which starts at paragraph 34. There is an attached traffic light attachment which shows the status of each project and further detail. We do need to have that program of work completed by December. It's going really, really well. MB Kanawa is our partners in the co-investment for that $24.2 million program. Are very happy with where we're at, and we're tracking very well on getting that completed. The only orange traffic light project in that is the Horsville-Haratini weed barrier replacement project. It's orange because the consent is currently being processed, so we need to wait for that. and we do need to install that. We plan to install it in November, which is obviously very close to the end of our contract. We do have a contingency plan, but we are still aiming for November to get that completed. So that's the only reason why that one's orange. And I'll just note that we did put forward, as had already been briefly discussed today, a business case. Environment Canterbury led that out with other regional councils for more one-off shovel-ready funding, which was unfortunately not funded in the May 2023 central government budget. But those conversations about possible one-off further funding as well as permanent funding are critical. We've seen what we can do with one-off funding. And as of 1 July next year, we're currently going back to maintenance of existing assets only, which, to be blunt, isn't enough for what we've got ahead of us, climate change and everything else. So we do need to keep actively working on those plans to hopefully bring back that partnership approach. The Rating District Programme of Work, which covers our 59 schemes and $832 million of assets, is progressing well. Big focus at the moment on seasonal work for tree protection, and we are gearing up for about a dozen or so River Rating District meetings in September, primarily to discuss possible core service or LTP considerations, particularly in terms of finance. The outer scheme section, we've given you a more comprehensive one than we have normally in this, and it's really to highlight the work that has been done, so that's transparent and visible, as well as the benefits of having that that budget available. So that was a general rate budget of $150,000 that was then subsequently approved to overspend, which we haven't needed to do. That was post-flood to help outside of schemes. So we've never before had a physical works budget outside the 59 schemes. We've always had an advisory budget. But the approach we took with that was really around partnering with others. And you can see in the table under paragraph 49, apologies, it doesn't have a number, but it's in there on page 47, the partnership approach we've taken to those 7 projects, as well as noting a number that are still in progress in South Canterbury. And under paragraph 52, that table is really to show the breadth of advice that we give across the region. We don't have a dedicated FTE or person for this. We fit it in as we can, but you can see there's huge community demand from private landowners as well as utilities for advice on what they could or should do for river protection and management activities. Asset management, paragraph 53, I'll just note our full report has now been published on the website. Apologies, the link is not quite in there yet. We can provide further detail on that if needed at the next catchment meeting. The key highlights in that report are really around the vulnerable schemes post 2021 flood, particularly in the North Ashburton, Hakateri and Selwyn Waikirikiri rivers. We've included a coastal section this time, and our senior scientist Chris Fouth has put this in here for us, really showing the coastal inundation and erosion issues across the Waitaha coastline have really become a hot topic of late. So we have included in there an update on the Waitarako wash dike strategy, which I know that you've had a briefing on, and we have included quite a comprehensive section of the paper on the areas of coast where we're currently focusing staff resource in terms of particularly in South Canterbury, where there's been large-scale inundation issues, particularly for a couple of private landowners as well as for some of our own assets. And there have been some issues around Tamutu, Cooper's Lagoon that staff are also supporting. So we are actively working with the community and other partners and stakeholders on that, particularly in terms of advice on what can and can't be done in terms of consenting, noting there is no current physical budget for coastal works, because traditionally Environment Canterbury has not taken an approach of defending the coast. The last part is cost and compliance before I move on to communications. So at paragraph 66, I'll just note there's 6 points there which we will bring to you amongst other options as part of core services, community resilience and hazards core service and LTP conversations, and that's really around what we should be doing differently. So our finance team are very ably working on a number of options, including a possible regional rating option, or we do have on the table active requests from Waimakariri and Selwyn to consider a district rate as well. So they will be brought to you as part of the next 30-year infrastructure briefing, which is scheduled for the 24th of August, I believe. And I'll just finish on touching on the communications and engagement section. There's a huge amount of work happening, both individually in terms of individual rivers, as well as wrapping into regional processes that Environment Canterbury has got going on a number of areas. And I've already noted the upcoming rating meetings. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lee, for a very comprehensive report. Question, people. Dion.
Yeah, there's a lot of information in here. I just wanted to pick on one thing, and it was in the numbers table that you've got there, and it's the maintenance budget that I wanted to touch on. It's seen it like this is a little bit like confronting. Averages out at about 1% budget, well, 1% maintenance budget after, just calculated it up. Where do we need to be sitting?
Thank you, Mr. Spiggs. You're referring to this blue table. We've been having this conversation as a staff team as well. There are a number of schemes where we don't have enough funding to be adequately maintaining our assets, let alone adapting for climate change and retreat and doing things broader than that. We think we're probably year on year about $10 million short. So that's you're probably a couple of extra % on there. We're working on bringing an exact figure of where we could be, including possibly catching up on inflation and what's realistic. Central government don't come on board in terms of rates rises to the next 30-year infrastructure briefing, but that's correct that we're definitely light on maintenance.
So actually, no, that's fine. Sorry, I've got enough to.
And Lee, maybe you just correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, in terms of further answering Dion's question, it's that the more aspiration we have to do the mountains to the sea and the whole of catchment management, that would actually probably add more money to that $10 million required in terms of actually being able to achieve, especially plantings and weed control and a whole lot of other stuff. Is that right?
It is correct in the sense that when we think of what we need to do, mountains to sea or region wide, it is additional funding. So it's whatever the schemes collect now, plus whatever we agree is the scope of what we should do. The other piece of that, and I'll just pick on the Rangatata, is we've just invested in that river $8.5 million of shovel-ready money. There's currently 65 landowners with a maintenance budget of about $250K that now have to maintain that, plus what they were doing, and they weren't even keeping up then. So we're about to have some conversations with them that are going to get pretty interesting, but they can't afford to pay for all that themselves. So we do need to look at options, and that's one of 59 schemes.
I'm just doing some very quick numbers in my head here, and in the return periods, let's say around 50 years. We've got 1% budget at the moment on average maintenance. So 50 years, 2% budget, 2%, we're going to have to double at least, which is actually more like nearly 20 million. I think we need to actually start being more realistic about the numbers. 10 million is not going to cut it at all. Just by going by those numbers. So I think we actually sort of need to be a bit more realistic about the numbers when we're talking about them. But it's just an observation. There's no question. I apologise.
Thanks, Dion. You finished? Claire?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just a query regarding points 21, 23, which is around the river revival strategies, and particularly inquiring around the Ashley Lakahuli strategy. we've sort of, I know time was, COVID got in the way and a whole lot of other stuff got in the way, but this is going on and on and on. Do you have a sort of a time when this work's going to be completed and we can have discussion actually with community and zone committees and things like that?
Thank you for the question. So the consultation for the Rakahuri in particular was broken into 2 phases. So there was the pre-consultation, which has occurred, but you are correct that the full public consultation is currently on hold. Staff are currently considering if we wrap that into the 3rd theme or the 3rd engagement strategy region that'll occur in October. The main reason for the delay has been both due to our capacity as staff, as well as we agreed to partner on the draft, and there has been some capacity issues at that end as well to move as quickly as we may have liked. This was the first strategy, first cab off the rank. Interestingly, the Rakatata revival strategy, which started after, is moving a lot quicker and is probably going to overtake the Ashley at this stage. But we are trying to move that one as fast as we can because we do know it's the community really want to see it.
Okay, Nick, and then Vicky.
Just adding to what Leon was talking about 2 weeks ago, Leon, we were talking about climate change and infrastructure investment. We sort of, like 3% is 25 million a year and 5% is 43 million. So where in that bracket, I guess, we're going to be. And like Peter was talking this morning about, we need to be spending at least 20 million. So which one of those roads you want to head down, really?
Cool.
Sorry, and what that's going to do to our rates going forward.
The 10 million I mentioned before was sort of on top of what we spend now. So we spend somewhere between 14 to 15 million. We do need to be spending at least 25 annually. We're working on that exact number, acknowledging it might be building up in terms of managing that rate shock.
At 25 million would be 3% of our asset, and currently we're running at about 1.7%. That's almost double.
Thanks, Nick. Vicky.
Yeah, firstly, willow poles. Or just to clarify, I asked this question this morning, so I know the answer, but I want just to for some assurance. So we're taking out willows where they're older willows and they've got big and they spread really badly, and people know about that. And then we're busy putting in willow poles. And I asked this question because I've had people question me and be concerned about it, that it seems a bit perverse that we're putting them back in, but they're different species or different properties to them.
I acknowledge it sounds a bit counterintuitive. So we are planting male and fertile clones, so they aren't spready ones. The technical terms. And in addition to that, most rating districts also run a fair waste spray program. So if something did happen to get away, we pick it up through that clearance program. So we are maintaining the areas that we work in as well, but we're not actively planting crap willow poles, which we know spread.
And then just continuing the maps conversation, so there's some commentary here, particularly around the coastal, and I know sometimes maps are sensitive as well, so it might not be something that we could do, but it would be great to just get a sense, because we talk about 20k in the report of particularly high risk, and how many we've got an enormous number of K of coastline, so we're just really interesting to see and get that perspective of just what does that look like, how's it look in the picture of the region, sort of where are the critical areas, and if that needs to be in a more generalized way, so we're not identifying specific individual properties, and that would be still helpful, I think. And then the final question on paragraph 64, which talks about significant conversations with at-risk communities at Milford Huts and South Rangitata Huts, for example, haven't yet occurred because of staff capacity. One is that comm staff, river engineering team staff, or both? And what are our plans, and do we have a timeline? Because it sounds like it's significant. I suspect people in those communities know these need to happen, and that's probably quite stressful for them to have it sort of hanging. So are we able to give a bit more clarity around, do we have something sort of at least roughly penciled in?
So the coastal conversation is mainly led through our hazards team and science, in combination with river staff if it's near a river mouth. So we are supporting them in this space. There have been conversations with those communities. I guess what this paragraph was signalling was we know that they're keen for more, and we haven't got exact dates for those yet. It's purely a staff resourcing pressure issue. The Rangatata one is interesting. The Huts community there want to have a conversation with us about retreating back onto Environment Canterbury land, and that's not something that internally we've landed any kind of view on yet. So that's probably a step we need to work through before we talk to them again next. But the fact that they are keen for those conversations is quite progressive and good.
That sounds like something we need to, but it's good to have that work collaboratively and indicate at least that we're sort of looking at when we can do that. Keep it well.
Look, Nick was whispered in my ear before the meeting, so he has a bit of an insight, especially around the South Canterbury hub communities.
Just off the record.
No, this is recorded. This is recorded.
That's all right. That's all right. I had a meeting with Mayor Barron yesterday morning, and we talked about this, and that some of the land in these areas is actually leased. They noticed by the council, but at some stage, we have to look at moving to other areas, higher ground. But I mean, a lot of the people in these areas choose to live there because it's affordable housing. So you've got to be conscious if you go, that they have to be able to go somewhere that's continues to be affordable. But the risk for them to stay there long term is too great, especially Waipopo and Milford Huts. And we know all the coastal inundation that's going on along that coastline from Timaru to the Rari River.
Thanks, Nick. Peter, I think you're on the same subject.
Specifically, these two communities are really sit in the TDC's pocket. The information that we've supplied them over a long period of time, especially Milford Huts, is that you're in the wrong place here. But TDC are responsible for that community. And the Rangatata, they sit on a leased piece of land or a reserve that created by TDC. They are looking to put up some protection there from the river, and they need to go to TDC to get the approval that they can get a consent to do the work. Now, we've been through that with them, so we're doing our duty there, and we keep in touch with them.
Thanks, Peter. Happy, Vicky?
Kia ora, Lee. First up, massive Mihi to you with the work that you do and your team, and of course we can all see how much you're covering here, so just want to acknowledge you and the work you do and your team. I just want to go back to Claire had a question about the river strategies. So you said October for the Rakahuri one. The Rakitata one, is there a plan, like a draft, and is it out, or is that October as well? Is that going to be October when it goes to the public already?
The Rakatata one's going live on the 4th of September.
Thank you. And that's sort of a similar thing for a lot of my comments here, is just like understand like the 100-year river strategy, like when do we expect like a draft or that to go live, or is that coming? So just those little things are important. The land strategy, I can't remember when our next briefing is about that one. And so they're just questions that I think we should try to answer and get some coverage on. The river district work, so there is updated terms of reference for most, that's what it said in the thing, for most districts now, or is that still a process we're in the middle of?
So the level of service last financial year was to scope it. So we've got a draft to bring to you hopefully at the next committee meeting. The reason we haven't specifically brought it to this meeting was if there was a council decision to change the rating approach that could affect the committee makeup. So we do intend to bring it to you for consideration and hopeful sign off this financial year. We'll just have a discussion about what meeting that is.
I think you mentioned earlier about the annual report of is it the condition, is that out? So you're going to send us a link? Cool. Thank you.
Jump in and ask a follow-up question to your question or your answer, Vicky, about if we change the rating schemes and therefore the funding mechanism will be different. Presumably we can still approve for those rating schemes or for those districts where we aren't going to make change and have provision within that plan to have a different answer where we do make a significant change. So that doesn't necessarily need to hold up. Does that necessarily need to hold up, bring that back to this committee?
No, it doesn't. So we've got a draft we can bring to you for consideration, and that can be signed off. I guess the piece that staff were just giving consideration to was around should we add anything else to that to cover for the future, or is that just about the schemes now? But it's pretty much ready to go. What is ready to go? If we're so the last terms of reference, it was attached to a previous committee paper. It's a page and a half. This one's a lot more comprehensive. It allows for Runanga to be part of the committee should they choose to, and it also has a code of conduct attached because we have had a few behavioural issues in some of the meetings. So it is. It's updated. It's similar to zone language, so it's consistent with other ones. So we can bring it to the November meeting if you'd like to sign that off soon.
Sorry, thanks, Lee. Back to you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, you've highlighted, point 66 and on page 51 there about the future financing options, which other councillors have brought up, Councillor Swiggs and Councillor Ward, and Councillor Sunkel and I were in a rating district meeting with Waihora. Similar themes of conversation came out of that around the whole, forecasting for future financing and all that. So it's an issue everywhere. And, I think the 5 points that you've got there under 66 about the options, I think we really do need to get stuck into that. And obviously the finance team's working on that. So I think that it is maybe good to, wait and look at the terms of reference with that knowledge in mind, because I think it is critical to the way they go forward. And I think, as John and I heard at our meeting, that's a key consideration for those, those ratepayers that are thinking about that right now. So, but I acknowledge you for putting this in here, because I think that's the crux of where we have to go to next. The sort of future funding, you've got things in there, and it sort of relates to the coastal issue. Sorry, and I'll get to my question in a second. Because I think that, I think the coastal stuff being in there, thank you for putting that in. The conversations we've just heard around the sort of hut communities and retreat. At the local government meeting conference last week, there was a good example. There was a presentation on two good examples, one from Australia and then one up on the East Coast about managed retreat. And so they were enlightening to see that when you do it well, there is challenges obviously with the community, but having a community on board already gets you a long way down that track. That 20 kilometres, and here comes my question about the coastal stuff, that 20 kilometres that's mentioned in there, my question is, I have asked for this, but have we done a regional wide assessment, or is that just like what's popping out to us at the moment? Or are we looking to do a greater assessment to actually find where those hotspots are?
So we actively monitor, Environment Canterbury has a series of benchmarks right along the coastline, and we actively monitor change, accretion or erosion. So we know essentially the spots that it is, there is an erosional trend. These ones in particular are hot right now because there's active issues. So there is a bit of reaction to it. There's also some issues popping up in the Hurunui district now as well. So I guess my answer is twofold. One, we kind of know not a surprise where they occur. What has happened, particularly with the flat beach at the moment, is erosion rates are an average. So say they erode 5 metres a year, but then as an average, it might erode 1 year 3 metres. So people are seeing rapid rates of change, which is obviously creating a lot of community noise. So we are in one of those rapid phases in some parts of the coast at the moment.
I suppose it's just getting that clear. So 20 kilometres is what we're currently sort of seeing as hotspots. I suppose my question is more about what do we anticipate that might be over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years? Like, where are those hotspots going to be? So we can, comes back to the funding thing, and one of the points in 66 there about the adaptation fund. Like, I can see that that's how you could, if we do that assessment, we do that work, we know where the potential hotspots could be, then you can try to rate for that or fund for that. And I don't think it should all be on ratepayers, like we understand that we could be thinking creatively about going to central government again on that stuff. So that's really what I'm interested in, is that, like, we've got the hotspots now. It's great that we know where they are, but I imagine that we're going to keep getting hotspots popping up, especially over the next few years. So it's more about that future planning. So yeah, really keen to see where we go with that. And that just all links into that funding and finance sort of conversation that we need to have. So, thank
you. One of the things that we need to do, Craig, also is adapt the tools that we have available to us to use. I mean, we have aspirational views about what coastal erosion means to us, but when you bring in the TA's responsibility and you bring in titles, you bring in banks and other things, then it becomes a confusing space. And I think the thing that we need to try and do nationally is get some sort of a like a SARA approach to it. Like we get an agency approach to how do we do this, because we've got willing participants. It's not like we need money. We've got willing participants, and can we do that?
And I think it's probably also, from what I took from you, Craig, is we need to elevate this question up to our communities and say to them, what are you prepared to fund, if anything, in terms of how we address this issue?
Just have this on my list about that jurisdiction issue, which you made that point really well, and we understand it too. That we haven't defended the coasts in the past as a regional council, but that's where I think we just need to have those sort of courageous conversations with our TLAs now, and of course Brunanga and central government, like Peter said. And I think we need to do some thinking on that, because as we found out at the Taumutu meeting, we all know it's one and the same ratepayer anyway. And then if you go to taxpayer as well, pay the same people as well. So I just think that's but who's going to lead it? Well, I think, I'm sort of advocating that we should do a bit of work in that space in terms of the thinking on it. Not so much, we're going to stand up and we're going to build walls or retreat people, but we could do the thinking on it and work with all those partners to, again, build the business cases that need to be built. And that's sort of space I'd like us to get into, because I think if we don't do it, who's going to, And hopefully we get some guidance from the, Adaptation Act as well, and potential funding that might come through that. So I think we should be ready for that.
Chair, are we having the general discussion now? Are we going to close off this?
As I said, and I guess it depends on how comfortable Lee is being part of the conversation, but my intent was to move into a sort of an informality in terms of discussing the issues. And if I think we stray too far one way or the other, I'll just pull us back into line a bit. But I'm happy to open it up and have Lee still sitting there if you're happy to still sit there for the discussion. David, are you happy with that? Cool. So yes.
Okay, I'll carry on with a few thoughts. Most of my thoughts I've conveyed at other forums and meetings. I think we've got an amazing opportunity as part of our long-term planning process to explore how we manage our catchments, if you like, inclusive of Takiwā, and so it's a broader picture view of what's going on, say, in the district. You can carve it up river to river and river to those sort of things. So it's that spatial planning stuff. And if we take a holistic and integrated view of spatial planning, of which a river is a part of that, then we can deliver a whole lot of thinking, or we can provide a whole lot of thinking on river management, biodiversity, settlement, but the whole land use activity, the whole thing. It's a broader scale kind of look at things, so that we're not just looking at a silo of this is the river and how do we manage that. It's the context of it. Where does it sit within the landscape? And our mountains to the sea approach, it's still completely valid within that framework. And so you're looking at a corridor. And I think if we look at it in a true corridor, rather than, and think bigger in terms of what do we need to protect? How do we do that? And what are the mechanisms to allow some overland flow? And if we're doing that, what does it affect? What's its effect? And I suppose for me, the LiDAR data is a key to that. And some of those historic photographs of where the Rangitata breached, and it's just coming across the land like it would have done donkeys years ago. And you say, okay, well, do you control that a little bit more, or do you just let it go? So those kinds of things in my thought. So that's the framework of looking at rivers. The other thing in terms of the financial stuff, I'm really supportive of a district-wide rate, but these options you've got here on 66, this actually can be a combination of things. I thought district was the way to go, but you could have because all the districts are different. The river flooding issues and are not as probably not as frequent in terms of emergency sort of stuff, say in Kaikoura, as maybe mid-Canterbury. So you kind of, by assessing the catchment approach, you potentially can identify what are the priority settings that we need to actually look at, not only within, say, a district. You could also apply a general regional rate to deal with sort of the major stuff. And you could do the same for the outer scheme work, apply a general rate to cover things that happen in Ashburton for the Ashburton River, say, versus other rivers that aren't really affected. And it's not necessarily going to be year in, year out that the same catchment would be affected. And then amalgamation of schemes. I think the current schemes need to go. My opinion is that they are too small, and they don't, or most of them are too small, and that they are targeted for a few. And I think we need to be bold and think of the whole population within the district and across the region.
Can I just jump in? And I'll come back to you, Grant. But can we just lift, rather than make specific recommendations about dumping rating schemes or whatever, just acknowledge that we've got. I mean, I certainly acknowledge the point you made that we have a large region with a lot of different catchments and different pressures, and that we will have bespoke solutions without at this stage saying we should do this one or that one, because we've got briefings that are going to come forward which will better inform the council to make those decisions as we hear the information. So thanks, Grant. Any other, Claire?
Very much. I'm guessing that the PowerPoint we got was a sort of a think piece for us to go with. Pardon? Oh, so this is a different piece?
The PowerPoint that's coming up that Sean is presenting. Are you talking? Yeah, that's right. I'm not allowed. I've got a note saying don't say that. I'm only joking, Claire. Yes, that conversation will further this conversation.
Yeah, I just think that we need to be very careful. We're having this conversation, and it is big, and it's going to affect people. And we've got some relatively small groups of ratepayers that are paying for flood and erosion controlling and drainage control. And we are talking about some big changes. And I just think that we need to be very careful around our communication and our discussion and making sure that we involve people, because we don't want to frighten the horses here, which is, you know, what I'm quite concerned about when we start talking about where funds might come from a mountain to the sea type work and firms and things like that. And I think if we're going to go to that, we need to be pulling everybody in, and everybody needs to be fronting up.
Thanks, Claire. And I think that probably is a good point in which to wrap this discussion up. We're going to have a workshop later where we might be able to touch on some of these issues. If I could just ask you one question, Lee, which is back to your paper, and that's about the out-of-scheme work. There's no inference in your paper to suggest that the demand for out-of-scheme work has been satisfied. It's just that we were operating to a certain budget, and we've been co-funding that with external participation. But there is quite a lot of out-of-scheme work that could be done. Yeah, so you're agreeing with me there. Yeah, cool. I think that's just an important point for councillors to recognise. Craig.
That point. I mean, I think that relates back to point 66 again, and that, you know, it just sort of more feeds into the fact that we need to look broader with how we look at rating districts going forward. So I think it's a good point to highlight the need. So yeah, thank you.
Look, in which case I will wrap it up, and I think I'll finish on reinforcing Claire's point that there have been no decisions around shutting down rating districts or significant changes to how we fund and how we manage our catchments, other than in Selwyn, where the district council have come to us and asked us to do that. And we think that the district council in the Waimakariri district is actually coming to us with the same request for the Ashley River. So we are responding to the community response, but we're not suggesting we're going to go out across the whole region and run roughshod over communities to make unilateral decisions. So I think that's given that this is a public meeting, I think that's really important, Claire, to reinforce that. That's not to say that if the community wants us to make change, we'll be more than open to listen to those community challenges. And there'll be some other challenges we'll be able to make as a tweak and go back to those communities and ask them if they will support it, and we will be driven accordingly. So it leaves me to wind up the meeting. The resolution. Yeah, sorry, we've got resolution. And the resolution is that we note the overview of the Key Rivers work program. So, Craig, thank you. Nick, seconder, thank you. Any further discussion? No further discussion. I'll put that motion. All in favour, please say aye. Yeah, thank you. Next meeting is for the Wednesday, the 8th of November, 2023. I thought of the frequency we have this meeting, so it might have been in about 2035, but having another meeting this year is quite special, really. I was really looking forward to it. And maybe this one's going to be in Twizel. Did I take it from you? Will be in Twizel. So that's cool. And I'll tell you about it. Yeah, cool. Joe, you're on Karakia. If I may pass to you, Joe, please. And
Hear the sunrise, appear the dawn. The birds are chattering, the beaks moving, spreading over the surface of the earth. The dawn chorus, it is night, it is dark, it is daylight. Amen.
Correct. There you, Joe.